sittings of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and live Joint Select Committee meetings and even media briefings. Don't forget to click the subscribe button to receive a notification when we are streaming live events. So visit our YouTube channel ParlView to keep current with all our parliamentary happenings.
The Honorable Vice President. President. Sorry.
Senator De Freitas.
Madam President, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this budget debate for the fiscal year 2017-2018. It is my third budget presentation, and albeit not as many as others in this August House, I heard today Senator Mahabir saying it's his 26th budget presentation. I do not have as those many years as Senator Mahabir. But I mention it really to reflect on the first budget presentation I would have had in this House, where I would have indicated as a newcomer that I would have been an observer and a contributor. And as the years went by and I would have gained experience, I would have added to that skill set. And one of the things I would have added as I fulfilled both roles as Vice President of this Senate and as a Senator is that I would have become an avid listener. Madam President, it is with that skill set that I listen intently to the Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, who I will congratulate on her maiden contribution here today. And it is with that intent listening that I would also listen to the members who oppose, members independent, and more importantly, members of the public. And in that listening, I would have come to three main conclusions. The first is that this budget presentation is less about politics and more about survival. Madam President, the revenues have declined. We know that we have to take action. The Minister of Finance has said this ad nauseum in 2015, reiterated it in 2016, and again in 2017. We know that we have to take action. We know that things are not good, but we also know that they will not be welcomed by all. I would even go as far as to say in 2015 that there may have been a sense of skepticism or even a delayed reaction when this was first said by the Minister of Finance in that inaugural budget presentation for this 11th Parliament. And that leads me to my second conclusion, which was I'm not sure exactly how many people get this. Madam President, coming into the 2015 budget, into 2010 government, which is the previous government in the 10th Parliament, you would have had a government that came in on campaigning of squandermania. And then when they came into government, they would have indicated that the treasury was empty, and then proceeded for 5 years to break every single national record in relation to expenditure. So I understand why the people would be skeptical when again they hear that revenues have declined and that the economy is bad. It is like the story of the boy that cried wolf. And we all know what happened when the wolf finally came. But the level of skepticism coming from certain quarters is beyond mere disbelief and bordering on pure resistance now. Spreading of fear. And you would have heard in the earlier contributions of others, especially members of the polls, words like recipe for economic chaos and disaster, catastrophe, inescapable precipice and death trap. Madam President, these are words of fear. You are hearing calls for disruptive behavior from the public domain. But for what reason? I will get to that shortly, Madam President. But for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, for those who truly understand the situation that we are in and what we are trying to achieve, I will say to you, when you hear them spreading fear, beware of those that would see this country burn, if only to be queen of the ashes. Yes. When you hear calls that would take this country down a path of disorder, I say to you, beware of those that would see this nation turn to chaos, if only to be the sellers of order. Madam President, when you see those who would prey on the addictions of others raise their voices, I say, beware of those who would see a people suffer, if only to be the richest person in the graveyard. Madam President, the third conclusion I came to is that this theme of this budget is aptly named Changing the Paradigm. The wolf is not yet here, and there's still ample opportunity to heed the cry. We must change the way we think. We must change the way we behave. We must change the paradigm. And you would have heard members opposite quoting philosophical and psychological philosophy. And the psychological fact that I will put forward today is you cannot solve a problem from the same mindset that created it. You must change your paradigm, you must change the way you think, and you must change the way you behave if you are to develop and move forward. That is what the Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance is trying to tell the nation. So what does that really mean? In the context of governance especially. Madam President, I would say it is changing the modus operandi that we've gotten accustomed to over the years, leading to a change in expectations of a citizenry. Simply put, Madam President, it is moving from a handout mentality to a way-out mentality when it comes to wealth distribution in this country. Madam President, for the remainder of my contribution, I intend to show how that mentality has changed between the previous administration and this current administration, but more specifically in relation to Tobago. Now, in all fairness, the overlying principle of the government is to share the wealth of the country evenly. Any government that comes into power, that's the overlying principle. Administration over the years have engaged in this handout mentality. That's what we're doing. Why? Because we had money to spend and no reason to change. In good times, we created programs, increased subsidies, allowed taxes to go uncollected, institutions to run up bills, etc., etc. Like I said, we continued like this because we had money to spend and no reason to change. However, the Minister of Finance has repeatedly stated in his various contributions that this style of operation was taken way overboard with the previous administration. I do not need to go into great detail because the various ministers in this chamber and in the other place would have gone into great detail as to exactly how that happened. But instead, I intend to focus on the differences between the style of operation itself and the benefits and disadvantages. Madam President, a handout mentality, although seemingly positive at first, has one main issue. You have to maintain a high level of revenue to support it, continuously creating a negative cycle of dependency, causing you to have to increase expenditure. What you have is a situation where individuals will be coming again and again through various avenues to access that wealth distribution. But if it is that you're having this handout mentality, you will end up doing certain things where you have to continue giving to these individuals or these institutions or businesses, whatever you want to call it, so much so that you keep having to maintain that revenue, but more importantly, increase the expenditure because you have to continue to give lest you have the ire of the public if you don't. Madam President, compare this to a way-out mentality, where you do not have to maintain high levels of revenue to support it, because the point is to reduce the number of hands of people in need by creating opportunities to find a way out of the economic circumstance that they may have found themselves in on the strength of their own efforts, therefore creating a positive cycle. In other words, Madam President, as you have the hands out and they are accessing opportunities and incentives, they will find a way out of the economic circumstance, therefore reducing the number of individuals that are in need. Madam President, the financial security of the population through that process will also grow, therefore meaning that for the government, it will have more revenue to have, and therefore allowing more money to go into developmental programs, creating more opportunities, creating that positive cycle to which I spoke. Madam President, simply put, if you give a man a fish, he can eat for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he can eat for a lifetime. And I will go even further to say, if you teach a man to grow a fish, he can feed a nation. Madam President, I will now go on to the modus operandi of what a handout mentality looks like. Because I would have heard in this budget debate so far individuals talking about, we keep blaming the previous administration, we should move forward. But the thing is, in order to move forward, you have to know where you come from. In order to change the mindset, you had to know what went wrong before. And therefore, I identified 4 activities that would have been taking place under that mindset. The first being increased expenditure with little to no return on investment. The second being a creation of projects which carry ballooned costs because the population has come to expect that the government has unlimited amounts of money, which in turn creates a false sense of stability in the economy. The third being, and this is most important, in the face of declining revenues, expenditure will continue to rise as per the issue I outlined earlier with the handout mentality. Expenditure will continue to rise to the detriment of all, leading to my 4th point in regards to the activity. There would be a prevalence of what can only be deemed irresponsible behavior that puts the entire country at jeopardy in order to maintain the illusion of a stable economy. And Madam President, to really bring this point home, I draw your attention back to the Minister of Finance's contribution in the other place. And as much as he might have been outlining the economic circumstance that we're in right now, I will just quote him, and in that you will see these activities that I'm talking about. And I quote, "Unfortunately for those of us who now have the task of managing the country's finances, under the previous government, spending escalated from $4.7 billion in 2010 to $62.8 billion in 2014, an increase of 34%, despite the fact that during the 2010 to 2014 period, core revenue never really recovered. In fact, core revenues in 2015 were essentially the same as they were in 2011, in the $43 billion range, while annual expenditure increased by over $10 billion in the same period. This pattern of government expenditure was and is unsustainable, but it created a false expectation among the general public that the good times would never end. Much of this increased expenditure was wasted or unproductive. Project costs skyrocketed during this period, doubling and tripling in many instances. Simple building projects, such as fire stations and police stations, exploded in price, moving from $40 million per station to $400 million in some cases, an increase of 1,000%. In fact, since 2015, as a result of the spending in the 2011 to 2015 period, the government's current account has been in permanent overdraft, very close to the allowable limit on virtually a daily basis, making it difficult on many occasions since the 2015 election for the present government to pay public sector salaries and wages. Madam President, I reiterate, prevalence of what can only be deemed irresponsible behavior. Madam President, increased expenditure with little to no return on investment, creation of projects which carry ballooned costs, and finally, in the face of declining revenues, expenditure will continue to rise. This is what we saw in the previous administration, and what I'm saying is that that was under a previous type of mentality which needs to change given the economic circumstance that we find ourselves in. So, Madam President, I now compare this to a style of operation under a way-out mentality. And the activities that you would find when it is that you have that kind of mentality in relation to governance and in relation or in response to the economic downturn is that you would find, firstly, a maintenance of programs which are meant to help create a way out for the most in need, but just need streamlining. And Madam President, I give you the example of the GATE program. We would have heard from members opposite in relation to the GATE program talk that this is causing hardship. That is not the case. The Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance would have indicated that that program needs streamlining. That where the program was is that it had ballooned in costs and therefore could not be sustainable under that mentality that we had before. So what has happened is that you create a means test now so that those who are in need can still access the program, but those who can afford to pay will do so. Therefore, creating a way out for individuals who are most in need. Madam President, I also use the example of CPEP and URP, where in that other place in the budget presentation for this fiscal year, it would have been indicated that these programs are going to be looked back so that you go back to the streamlining, so that you get it back to where it should be in terms of being a way out for individuals who need it most. I even go further into the housing program, where you would have heard the changes to that program from 2015 to now, whereby you move from individuals who could afford housing being part of the program to now individuals who could not afford having greater access to that program. And the Minister of Finance would have indicated even more in relation to that program by implementing a rent-to-own structure so that those who are most in need, those who wish to find a way out, can access these programs that are maintained for those that are most in need. Madam President, the second activity is a reduction in overall expenditure and a streamlining of systems to reduce leaked revenues. And the example I give of this in this current administration is the Revenue Authority, where the Minister of Finance would have indicated leakages after leakages after leakages in relation to tax collection in this country. And therefore, we cannot continue in this mentality or in this way because these revenues are needed. So the setup of a Revenue Authority, which would collate these institutions to help us collect the taxes that we should be collecting to the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago so that you can create more opportunities, you can create more incentives, and you can create more programs for those that are most in need. And that is how a way out mentality operates. Thirdly, Madam President, the creation of policies and projects which, when accessed by citizens, give them an opportunity to create a way out on the strength of their own efforts. And that is the most important line, on the strength of their own efforts, because that is an underlying principle of the way out mentality. Meaning that when they create their way out, they do not continue to return in terms of needing these opportunities and incentives. They can actually go forward to create opportunity and incentives for others. The greatest example I can give is the Business Development Incentive Program, specifically at $100,000 that the Minister of Finance would have indicated in budget presentation. And what would happen here, Madam President, is that individuals would be able to have another avenue to access funding by which they can develop their business idea and increase the number of small and medium enterprise businesses, hopefully escalating and growing to big business in Trinidad and Tobago, therefore creating jobs for other citizens who have not gone down that avenue. And Madam President, I would really use the analogy of something that we all use in this chamber, social media. How many of us know that Facebook was started with between $1,000 to $2,000 US and is now a multi-billion-dollar entity that is global? I say now that you could have just 10 individuals in Trinidad and Tobago that access this, that go down that road if they are to create something similar. What would that do for the economy of Trinidad and Tobago and the ability for us to create revenue so that we can put into programs to further develop the nation? Madam President, I also move on to the ability to access US for smaller enterprises. We know what the situation is right now when we talk about the amount of US in the country and the ability to access. And the Minister of Finance would have indicated the kind of pressures this would put on small enterprises that manufacture right here in Trinidad and Tobago but have a product that could be sold in the US. And if you can't access the US to get the raw material to create your products, then your business is essentially stifled. So therefore, creating this kind of program where specifically these small enterprises or medium enterprises can access this US to get the raw material, to increase production, if you want to go down that road, to be able to export to foreign countries where they can sell the product for US and have that US come back into this country, therefore alleviating that problem that caused this program to be set up in the first place. Madam President, that is how you create a way out. Madam President, I now move to Tobago and tourism. In the context of the argument that I've laid out thus far, which is handout versus way out, in order for Tobago to reach its true potential, the paradigm must shift. I can say that today, for the first time, I've heard the word Tobago used so many times by members independent. And that is probably because we really need to change that paradigm. I don't know if it's because I'm sitting here and I'm Tobagonian that they see me and they start talking about Tobago. But, Madam President, it cannot be that Tobago continues to be an expenditure item in the budget, governed by a percentage of the overall budget. It cannot be that Tobago is reliant on the quality of relationship with central government in order to be given an opportunity to grow and develop. I have said it in every single budget debate. This administration has begun to lay the foundation of what the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago should be like. When I look at the allocation for Tobago this year, I see a Minister of Finance who, after reducing the overall expenditure, would have still endeavored to ensure that Tobago received 4.34% of the total expenditure. And albeit that this is slightly less than the 4.4% he would have given last year, it is really the mathematics, in that it is the total expenditure that decreased. But yet he still continued to endeavor to give us 4.3%. And when you take it in context of what is going on in the country, you cannot be mad at the Minister of Finance for that. But in the context of the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and changing the paradigm, you really have to look at how far beyond the Dispute Resolution Commission's range of percentage in relation to the total expenditure of the country that the Minister of Finance would have gone. And, Madam President, that takes me to the ability to borrow, the discussion that is now being engaged between the Minister of Finance and the Tobago House of Assembly. And the thing is that he would have done this because he had, one, a commitment to Tobago and the confidence in Tobago to lead the diversification process and charge as it relates to what we need to do for Trinidad and Tobago to move forward. And I would have heard in the budget debate thus far questions being raised as to why is Tobago being allowed to borrow? How did Tobago get a rating? And, Madam President, I, in my first budget contribution, indicated exactly why. And therefore, I am going to reiterate it now. In a newspaper article on Friday, February 20th, 2015, this is what I read, and this is what Moody's said. In order to secure the rating...
Senator, could you just say, identify the newspaper, please?
Oh, sorry. The newspaper was The Guardian, Trinidad Guardian, Madam President. And I quote, in order to secure the rating, which the Moody's team has indicated will be positive, the THA has been subject to intense scrutiny of its financial operations, including examination of its institutional framework, its sources of income, the performance of revenues of the THA, expenditure trends, including the evolution of its recurrent expenditure, its contingencies, account expenses, THA deposits, cash management and liquidity, and debt financing and management. So this was not somebody you found on a beach that gave a credit rating. This was an international professional organization that gave this credit rating. That is why the Minister of Finance has confidence in Tobago, so that he can engage in discussions in regards to borrowing to meet the shortfalls in the budget as it relates to Tobago. Madam President, the credit rating that was subsequently gave was BAA1, which ideally was downgraded because the credit rating for the entire country was downgraded, and Tobago is part of Trinidad and Tobago. But I go on to quote, TNT now enjoys a BAA1 rating, and the outlook for the THA's rating may be on par. Interim reports indicate that the island is on the high-end spectrum when compared to other rated Latin American regional governments whose scores span BAA1 and CAA3. The island's balanced fiscal results, operating surplus, very low debt levels, and solid liquidity position were noted in the report and should impact positively on the overall grade assigned. And like I indicated, the grade that was eventually assigned was BAA1. But it goes on to say, if given a BAA1 rating, which it was, Tobago will be one of the highest ranked in the Caribbean, scoring higher than Barbados, Jamaica, and St. Vincent, among others. Madam President, if that is not creating a way out for Tobago, I don't know what is. But it doesn't stop there. We've all heard of the Sandals Project. It has come up for public discussion in the public domain as to the benefits of such a project. But the Minister of Finance would have indicated certain things last year, and as I've indicated earlier on in this contribution, I became an avid listener. And I don't think I heard it being mentioned again in that debate or in the public domain, so I will mention it now. Madam President, with that project, the Minister of Finance indicated last year that there would be $100 million annually to be spent on local goods and services in Tobago. Let me just let that sink in for a second. $100 million in local goods and services. That's $100 million that Tobago does not have right now. And in response to the independent bench, when they indicated that Tobago does not have agriculture to feed itself, I will say this. If Tobago is to have agriculture to feed itself, most people would get into agriculture for business. They built a house, they need to pay bills. So when you look at the total population of Tobago, in terms of growing agriculture, when you want to expand like most agricultural individuals in that business in Trinidad, they may not be able to expand as they need. They can't export to Trinidad or send food to Trinidad because we just heard in this chamber that Trinidad loves imported food. So they will not buy food from Tobago. So when you have $100 million available in local goods and services, you now create a market for the agricultural sector in Tobago. That is creating a way out for individuals who want to enter into that sector or any other business that relates to the tourism sector in Tobago. When they enter into that market share, they can build a life for themselves, therefore creating that way out, Madam President. Madam President, he went on to say there would be $500 million annually to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm sure the minister in the Ministry of Finance would tell us when she wraps up what she could do with that $500 million. That's $500 million the country doesn't have right now. Madam President, it doesn't stop there. He went on to indicate 3,500 jobs would be created between construction and direct employment. 3,500 jobs, Madam President, is no drop in the bucket. I have heard the public sector in Tobago lament over and over again about the number of employees that the Tobago House of Assembly has and the percentage of the island population. And if you have this way out mentality, you can see that individuals who are in the THA right now can transition from that entity into the tourism sector, either directly with Sandals or through business on their own, so much so that you reduce the recurrent expenditure of the Tobago House of Assembly, therefore allowing for that money to be transferred to capital expenditure, allowing Tobago to develop projects and create more opportunities so that people in Tobago can create a way out for themselves. Madam President, that is how you create a way out for Tobago. Madam President, it is with these things, and I'm not done, there's more. But it is with these things that I can stand here today and I can make a prediction. With the Sandals Project, with the confidence and the commitment of the Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, today I make a prediction and put it into the Hansard so it could be checked in the future, that Tobago will become a net contributor to the Treasury of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, I move forward to the Ministry of Tourism, really. And it is the first time that I've seen a ministry try to operate in a manner that is realistic to what the reality of Trinidad and Tobago is. What am I talking about? Madam President, we are 2 islands, 1 nation. We are 2 cultures, 1 people. We have 2 histories, 1 flag. And now we have 2 entities, 1 tourism product. A tourism entity for the tourism product in Trinidad, and a tourism entity for the tourism product in Tobago. And Madam President, I can tell you how that would go and how the initiatives would come forward in regards to that. I had the opportunity to host in August of this year, co-host actually with the Speaker of the House, a presiding officers and clerks conference that invited speakers of various houses up and down the Caribbean, along with the presidents of the Senates. And one of the activities that we'd had to engage in is a day-out activity once the conference was done. And you would have heard time and time again the problems that the tourism product would have had, so therefore there would have been some trepidation. But I could tell you on that day Tobago stood tall, and on that day Tobago made me proud. And I really have to put into the hands today and thank the Charlottesville heritage performers. Because what we would have done for these individuals is that we would have taken them to the town of Charlottesville, and we would have taken them to what I call an interactive cultural item, something I have never seen in all the conferences I've attended, in all of the islands that have tourism as a main source of revenue. And I could tell you, based on the responses and the smiles and the faces that I've seen, that these individuals would have danced the cocoa. They would have eaten fire on top and what we call fire below bake. Best bread in Trinidad and Tobago. Linda's can't touch it. They would have partake of hot chocolate made from cocoa grown in Tobago. And when that was done, they would have gone to the riverside where there would have been an interactive cultural item that taught them about the cultural history of Tobago, something we call washing the dead bed. And they would have learned about that and engaged in that activity. When that was done, they went to another part of Charlottesville where they would have drank cane juice, freshly squeezed cane juice, jumping up and down on the cane to squeeze it out, on the log that would squeeze the cane to squeeze it out, and then partaking in that juice. And I could tell you, after all of these activities, it may sound like a little, but after all of these activities, upon leaving this country, they turned to me and they said this was the best conference they ever attended. They were so pleased. And therefore, it is based on that that I can say, with this initiative, where Tobago can develop its own tourism product, and Trinidad develops its own tourism product, that I expect a whole lot more. Madam President, as I conclude, I hope that those listening understand or take away at least two messages from what I have said. The first is, based on this budget presentation that we've put forward, that those looking for a way out would find ample opportunity and ample incentives. But those that continue to look for a handout would find that there's less to go around. But in order to advance to the next level of this country's evolution, we need to understand that we need to step outside of our comfort zone. Madam President, we need to understand that we need to change the paradigm. Our founding fathers would have left us with 6 little words that in good times acts as a reminder, but in bad times acts as a guiding light and a guiding principle for us to find our way out. If we work together, we can achieve greatness. If we work together, we can aspire to anything. Be it as 2 islands, 1 nation, be it as 2 parties, 1 parliament, or, Madam President, be it as 2 neighbors, 1 constituency. We will survive. And in our attempts to do so, may God forever and always bless the red, white, and black. Madam President, I thank you.
Before I call on Senator Richards to speak, I just want to remind members there was a procedural bulletin that had been circulated about the use of electronic devices. I'll advise members to pull it up and have a look at it, and for the new members to also have a look at it, okay? After I've said this, please don't let me hear anybody's devices going off. Senator Richards.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2018, more commonly known as the Budget Statement 2018, delivered by the Honorable Minister of Finance on the 2nd of October 2017. It's subtitled, Changing the Paradigm and Putting the Economy on a Sustainable Path. There's much that I agree with in this budget, and I commend in terms of the Minister's ability to continue the government's trend toward conservatism, because we seem to have let that paradigm run away with itself for many years, putting us in this position of, according to Senator Mahabir, our 10th deficit budgeting presentation. So there's a lot that is commendable in terms of conservatism, prudence, scaling back, especially where items like the subsidies are concerned. But there's much that I'd like to outline in terms of the mandate for changing the paradigm that I would have liked to see more of, or at least clearer provisions and maps for. I'd also like to say at the start of this presentation, I'd like to congratulate the Prime Minister and the government for the spotlight on the economy, which I think is a good initiative in principle. I think it was able to provide much needed and essential context, especially where we find ourselves economically in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't think the population really got it for the last 2-3 years. And this is even before the last administration went out of office. I don't think we understood where we are as a country economically and the challenges that face us, because that's evident by the fact that our patterns, consumption patterns have not changed. Our general behaviors have not changed. But I think that was a very good forum that provided that sort of context. What I found was missing in that also, as a bit of a critique, and constructive critique, I hope you take it, is that it was also touted as being consultative. And I really don't, with respect, think that a presentation 4 or 5 days before a budget is in the spirit of real consultation. Because we know what goes into the preparation of a budget. It takes months and months, and then there's the printing of the documents and stuff. So I would prefer, if I can humbly suggest, that it take place, it continues, firstly, no matter who's in power, and it takes place some weeks before, so that really critical stakeholder groups can really have a chance to contribute their ideas and their thoughts that may be better included into the presentation later on. But I think it's commendable, and congratulations on that. I think the population got a chance to see in that spotlight a positioning of the economy in terms of the transfers and subsidies, government expenditure, repayment, debt servicing, public sector salaries, and where we are with that, compensation, the PSIP, revenue, non-energy and energy, and to me, very important, the deficit situation. Generally, just to reiterate a bit, total revenue, 45.741 billion, oil revenue, 6.412 billion, non-oil revenue, 32.910 billion, capital revenue, 6.419 billion, which makes for a total expenditure, net capital repayment and sinking fund contribution of 50.51 billion. And the document goes on to outline the various main categories. The largest of the share going to education and training, 7.2905 billion, national security, 6.2371 billion, and health, $6.0278 billion. In terms of the subtitle, Changing the Paradigm and Putting the Economy on a Sustainable Path, where we are, in terms of we have to engage in some sort of focused and strategic efforts, because if we think of changing a paradigm, we really have to think of a different kind of thinking. We have to think of innovative thinking. And to be very honest and respectfully, I didn't see the kind of innovation that I would have liked to see in terms of approaches to dealing with some of our challenges and approaches to introducing new measures for revenue generation in the context of where we want to be 5, 10, 15 years down the road. At the risk of engaging in sterile academic discourse, I'll be referencing some academia in my discourse, just for reference, not to bore anyone. You know, I look at education, which anyone who's heard me make contributions before is my pet area. National security, food security, agriculture, health, public utilities, public service delivery, state agencies and enterprises, and of course the D word, which I think every speaker so far, and I'm sure possibly every speaker to come, will deal with, which is diversification. in the context of the changing paradigm, the question arises, are we really changing the paradigm in the sectors or ministries, or are we making subtle changes, but overall, in terms of trajectory maintaining the status quo? You know, what measures have we seen outlined to really change the paradigm? You know, what are we looking at ministries and the allocations and the way we operate, the approaches, the processes, the policies, the productivity levels that are a critical issue in Trinidad and Tobago? We have, it was really interesting going through this document in detail, the State Enterprise Investment Program 2018, in terms of the fact that we have 49 wholly owned state agencies, 8 majority owned, 5 less than 50% owned agencies, 55 indirectly owned, 7 statutory corporations, including TT Post, WASA, the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, PTSC, TN Tech, HDC, ATT, etc. And we have to ask ourselves, as we move forward, even with the commendable efforts the government is making to reduce our expenditure and cut wastage, have we taken a look at these agencies as I outlined them? Do we really need all of those? Have many of them, though they may have been useful 10, 15 years ago, still relevant today or useful? Are we duplicating services and wasting money? And I think that is something we need to do as a country if we really want to change the paradigm. Because when you look at many of these agencies, and you have to ask, well, what are they contributing? How effective are they? How relevant are they in terms of the government's policies and thrusts in new directions? I really don't see it, and I'm seeing many of them actually offering duplications of services that can be really done under one umbrella, or quite frankly, done away with and done effectively by a ministry. And that is something we have to look at in Trinidad and Tobago, because when you think of the cumulative costs in running many of these agencies, it adds up. And you see the number of them I've outlined. We also, I think, respectfully need to look at the governance structures of many of these agencies. I mean, our country, over the last 25, 30 years, is replete with examples. I'll call it UDICOT 1, 2, 3, and 4 in different administrations. EFCL, Airports Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, WASA, HDC, Sport TT, and most recently and most publicly, embarrassingly, the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. And administration after administration, we're seeing the kinds of deficiencies in governance, in accountability, in transparency. We've seen what can only be described as mismanagement, corruption, malfeasance. And we have to ask ourselves, are the governance structures working to really implement and operationalize government policy, no matter who is in power effectively? Because no matter who has been in power for the last 20, 30 years, we've had these scandals, these points of mismanagement, these imbroglios over and over and over again. So what's the real problem here? Obviously, the structures that we may have envisioned and engaged in 20 years ago are not doing what they're supposed to do today, leading to these agencies and enterprises really underperforming in terms of their ability to deliver to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and contribute productively to the economy. And it seems that we've accepted many of them, and I'll outline a few later on in terms of where we need to look, possibly, in terms of how we view them. We just accept that it seems we just accept that we have to have huge amounts of subsidies and transfers to agencies like CAL and PTSC and WASA, because it has been so. When you really think about it, we have seen amazing turnarounds and success stories in TT Post, National Flour Mills, Petrotrin, depending on what era it's in, and NGC. So why can't those sorts of success stories and the analysis of how they succeeded and why they continue to succeed, or the shortcomings, be applied to other agencies in terms of really changing the paradigm? if we're really changing the paradigm, 5 to 7 state agencies or enterprises performing adequately and accepting that the others are just supposed to be revenue takers instead of balancing the books and revenue generators is not really changing the paradigm. It's really, when you think about it, accepting the status quo. And that is something I think we need to look at, because I have some examples that I think are noteworthy in terms of how we can move those situations forward. Madam President, so at the basis of my presentation is the issue of innovation. Innovation, innovative thinking. And when you look at what is innovation, it's a new way of doing something. It may refer to incremental, radical, and revolutionary changes in thinking, products, processes, or organizations. Peter Drucker, who is viewed as an innovation guru, says innovation as a tool or instrument used by entrepreneurs or agencies to exploit change and opportunity. He argued that innovation as a discipline is capable of being learned as well as practiced. He never agreed to a theory, but he certainly agreed to the development of an environment that facilitates innovation so that it can be put into practice and sustained. And I don't really think we've done that successfully in Trinidad and Tobago. We've had spurts of innovation. Point Lisa's industrial estate, obviously innovative. That's a clear example. But then what have we done with that to sustain the innovation that really has provided our breadbasket over the last couple of decades in Trinidad and Tobago? Drucker continues that prospective, systematic innovation consists of purposeful, organized searches for changes, analysis of present structures, the systematic analysis of the opportunities that changes may offer for economic and social innovation. Because social innovation is also very important in the context, because we can't really practice innovation if we don't get the people to buy into it and have a mindset or paradigm change in the way we think about our country and how we want to contribute to our country developing and moving forward. And when you think of innovation, you really have to think of the issue of research and development at a national level and how much emphasis we place on research and development. And when you think of the countries that are doing well, you look at their contribution per GDP, per percentage GDP, in terms of contribution. And in many of these countries, this is legislated. It's not optional depending on who comes into power, who goes into power. They will say, we have to put 5% of our GDP towards research and development. We have to put 7%, and the countries that are doing really well, you see are the countries that are putting higher percentages per capita of GDP in terms of research and development, because they understand the need to continuously position themselves ahead of the pack in any particular sector which they feel to pursue. And I don't think we're doing that in Trinidad and Tobago. The United States, 2.74%. China, 2.1%. Japan, a country we love to compare ourselves with, 3.584% of GDP. Mandated, goes toward research and development. Germany, another country that's doing very well, 2.869%. South Korea, 4.292% of GDP toward research and development. France, 2.52%, and the list goes on. Sweden is also a country pretty high up, 3.161%, going toward research and development. And we have actually quite an astounding platform in Trinidad and Tobago, because we're a country that's replete with tertiary level institutions that have long histories of doing research. Unfortunately, the research ends up on academic shelves and ends up being classified as sterile academic discourse. No pun intended. So it's not really applied research. And any academic will tell you, if research is not applied, it's really wasted. We have great thinkers in Trinidad and Tobago, from Lloyd Best coming right back down to many of today. But we really have not applied the innovation and the forward-thinking methodologies that they've posited over the years. Madam President, let me move on to changes in paradigm in education. Our primary and secondary school challenges. Poor performance at SEA, when more than half of school districts, the statistics show that students are performing below the national average. We like to jump up on a high horse when SEA comes around, and this is apolitical. This is no matter who is in power, and the education ministries for the last 15, 20 years, the day after SEA results, we jump and we go and visit the 3 top performing schools and take the perfunctory photo ops, but are we looking where we should be looking? Those students are not they should be congratulated, don't get me wrong. But those students are not where we should be placing most of our attention. We need to look at the more than 5 performing less than, 60% performing less than the national average. Because when you look at the school districts in Trinidad and Tobago, there are more than half of them where the majority of students and entire schools are performing below the national average in math, language, and creative writing. Below the national average. 2,170 students scored less than 30%. It's according to the Express, July 5th, 2017, in a press conference hosted by the Minister of Education. Additional attrition rates are unacceptable in terms of the fallout between primary and secondary schools. We're not changing the paradigm where these things are concerned. Recently, I saw an article online where Sweden has announced, and Sweden, as you know, is one of the top 3 education districts in the world, has announced that they will be totally abandoning examinations and their prior way of educating their human capital. They're not doing no math exam, no English exam, no creative writing exam. They are going toward a different model, a communication model, a creative thinking model from as early as primary school, where they are envisioning models of communication, models of creative thinking, models of innovation and technology, and they're focusing heavily on technology, where they incorporate math, they incorporate creative writing in terms of the process for furthering these new dimensions. And that is the way they think they will be able to position their human capital to an advantage in the future. So even though they're on top of the game, they're still innovating because they've done the analysis as to why they are on top of the game and what they need to do to remain in that position. We don't seem to be taking those lessons in Trinidad and Tobago. I have to ask the question that I should have referenced it earlier on. We find ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago in a very similar, some may argue worse situation because time has passed, as we did in the late 80s, early 90s. And we all know what happened. We also experienced a precipitous drop in energy prices. And we found ourselves having to go through a series of initiatives to try and stabilize the government of the day, the NR, pay the ultimate political price, although the late President and Prime Minister Arthur N.R. Robinson probably did the right thing, as did his counterpart Margaret Thatcher when the UK went through a similar situation and put us back on a path to sustainability. But I have to ask the question, did we learn anything from that time? Apparently not. And if we learned anything, how much did we apply? Because if we really learned anything at that time, we should not have found ourselves in this situation today. And again, we like to blame PNM, UNC, whoever, but all the different groups have had their time running the country. But collectively, it's all led us to this point today. So I'm hoping, and I know Trinidad and Tobago will recover, and I underscore Senator De Freitas' sentiments that he has faith in Tobago and Trinidad, that we will recover from this. I am absolutely sure we'll recover from this. But will we find ourselves here again in 15, 20 years? Will we actually be mature enough as a country to take the lesson this time around? Or will we just end up floundering again in 15, 20 years? Because we get a miraculously, oil goes back to $80, $90 a barrel, and we abandon any attempt at real diversification. Well, I hope not. I hope we really take the lesson this time and put the lesson into practical action. Attrition rates are unacceptable in terms of the falloff from primary and secondary schools, where the legal mandatory age for students to attend school is from 5 to 15. That's primary and secondary challenges, significant challenges that we can address if we deal with our education system. Tertiary level challenges. Recently, and I agree with the government's continued thrust toward the rationalization of GATE. There are different debates on how persons who are eligible should be identified, but that's, to me, a matter for the government policy. We allowed GATE to become a babysitter in Trinidad and Tobago to the cost of billions and billions of dollars, and we still really have not done a proper assessment of what it has contributed. Yes, we have a better educated society. In many ways, we have more people with undergrad degrees, postgrad degrees, doctorates. But how does that align to where the country wants to go into the future? And that's what we need to do. But even as we continue funding, I know quite a bit of policy change has been initiated in terms of streamlining GATE and making it more efficient. We still have serious problems. I want to quote from a report done by Dr. Letitia Williams, Assistant Vice President, Student Support Services at UTT, December 2016. This focuses on UTT, but I understand COSTAT has similar challenges in terms of where we need to look at in terms of administrative audits for these state institutions. I understand UE is doing much better, but still probably needs to be looked at. And it really outlines in terms of student retention and success at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. The cost of low student retention has a significant impact on students and the nation and the cost of education. National students who do not persist to completion, it's called persistent rates, in terms of their originally stated academic goals, immediately incur debt to the government and are ineligible for further GATE assistance for tuition expenses. But the cost has already been incurred. At UTT, each year, approximately 20% of the student population are on academic probation or suspension, 20%. And these students are not eligible to receive GATE funding. Many of these students struggle to pay tuition costs and often drop out after year or one because they really, one, they were badly screened. Two, the academic advisement was poor. Curriculum design didn't meet their needs at the time. And student engagement also was not in support of them staying in. From a financial perspective, each student who attends the university represents a flow of revenue through tuition to the school paid either directly or indirectly. The revenue is lost when a student leaves. According to the Q&A and IE Student Persistence Report 2013 that examined the persistence of 2009 to 2013 cohort, the report showed that for 2009 cohort, 70% of bachelor students and 29% of diploma students did not re-enroll in year 2. The average tuition for a bachelor degree for programs is $12,000 per year. The total cost in terms of money lost down the drain, $7,554,000. That is just for that 2-year period. And that's just for UTT. At the other institutions around the country, and we'll see how much wastage it is. The reasons for withdrawal: academic difficulty, financial issues, family issues, issues with the lecturer, loss of interest. The underlying issues that led to those issues: poor recruitment and admission processes, because very often in Trinidad and Tobago, and these are not necessarily at the state-run institutions, GATE became a business model, quite frankly. That's what happened. Government was paying tuition, 100% undergrad, I think it's 2/3 master's, postgrad, and an even smaller amount for PhD students. So many of these institutions realized, you know what, let me pack up with a sort of thing, and students will apply, and I will make money, and we saw the expansion. And in many instances, inclusive of the state institutions, to keep the students rolling through, there was plain out dishonesty and cheating. Because if I maintain standards and students drop out, I don't get the full 4-year money from the state. And that was not being audited. And standards were not being maintained. So you have students coming out of these institutions who can't read and write, who have bare minimal competencies in a degree that they were awarded. And they go out into the workplace lost. But you know what? I have a degree. An institution has the millions of dollars. And I'm glad that we're taking a closer look at this situation, because it was not in the interest, one, of economic conservatism, and it also certainly didn't save the country in terms of preparing the human resource capital in Trinidad and Tobago to position this country in an advantageous position. Many of these students that I've spoken to, even presently enrolled, at COSTAT, at UTT, some at UE, but to a lesser extent at UE, are expressing utter frustration, abject frustration. There's a young woman I spoke to who was part of a cohort of 14 at UTT's fashion faculty 3 years ago, sorry. The faculty started off with 14 students, and by the end of year 2, it was down to 2. 2. So those 2 students were basically assured of passing, because if they didn't pass them through, the cohort crashed, and somebody has to account for that. So I think we need to take a serious look inside these institutions and see if the administrative processes and other issues are being dealt with and run. And I have the statistics for UTT, and I have also some serious concerns from students of COSTAT and faculty of COSTAT. And these are state institutions that have remained within the ambit of receiving funding. Though it has been reduced, they receive funding, so I do believe they need to be audited. Madam President, staying with education for a few moments more. My formal training is psychology, sociology, and education, with special emphasis on special education. So you see special needs kids and their families, or kids with special needs, I should say, and their families, they have a special place in my heart, because I have interfaced with so many of them and their families, and I know, as a so-called normal student, the challenges that exist. One could imagine if you have been diagnosed with any one of the 13 areas in special needs, including autism, deaf blindness, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health, emotional disturbance, intellectual disability, Down syndrome. It is even more challenging, and our Constitution really mandates an education for every child, but every child is different. Even so-called normal children are different, and they're different learners. And we have, yes, our education ministry provides for students with disabilities and special needs with the so-called student support services, which I understand from workers is in crisis. And even if you jump through the hoops to get the support, you get $2,500 a month. Let me just give you an example. And a modern education system must treat all learners as unique. Modern, caring, progressive countries understand that special needs children and their families must be supported with different, specially designed access to education and support services that meet their unique needs, because their needs are different. Equality is not equity. Equity is not equality. They need special support services. And when we're spending billions of dollars, I think education and training is the highest amount allocated in the budget, $7.2905 billion. How are we treating this vulnerable group and their families? I want to beseech, and this is not bashing the education minister or education ministry. I'm actually advocating on their behalf and pleading for us to take a look at our Education Act that is amended to meet global best practice, that provides what is described as a free and appropriate education. And appropriate means all the services that unique learner must need, and someone has to speak on their behalf because they're being neglected and the families are suffering. I'll just give you 2 quick examples, Madam President, because I interface with these families all the time. One mother whose son has a hearing impairment has to find $2,500 extra a month for a special tutor for her son because the classroom doesn't provide it, and she has 2 other children, and she's a single mother. And she has to jump through hoops to get the $2,500 annually, and then find $2,500 for 11 other months to make sure her child, whom she loves like anybody else's child, gets the education that she thinks he deserves because she wants him to do the best in his life. And she has the right to that, like any other parent. There's another father that I spoke to whose son has been diagnosed with Down syndrome. His son is 13 years old. He has to find $5,000 every month extra for therapy and services for his son, and he has to provide for 2 other children. And there are thousands and thousands of other families affected like this that student support services is not getting to. And something has to be done. Someone has to speak out on their behalf. when we're spending, when we're talking about in the context of a budget, every citizen should feel that I'm able to get a piece of this pie, and I'm able to do the best for my family and my child, no matter what my circumstances, because they're a citizen of this country. And the vulnerable groups in this country are not being attended to, and this is a vulnerable group that must be attended to. So I beseech, as I said, I am not bashing the minister. I am asking, please, let's take a look at our Education Act to amend it to make sure that this group is covered. I also want to speak a bit to the groups, because there are many, many groups, including Down Syndrome Family Network, Autism Society, and others that cater to the needs of families with children with special needs, that are doing great work. But I've told them this before, because I interviewed them a lot, that you really cannot negotiate with any government as separate entities. There are 13 categories of special needs, and if every different category has a different demand, as opposed to them coming together and advocating for special needs legislation in our Education Act, it is going to be much more effective and easy for a government to respond to that. So I urge these groups to come together to mitigate and advocate on their behalf. So please, I want to move on quickly, Madam President. My good friend, Senator Baptiste Primus, is my next, I don't want to say target, but my next point of interest. You know, I want to commend the government for, in the budget, has been announced the business development grant, which I think is excellent. Because we all know the countries, including the US, that are doing well, have invested in the development of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. So the government's intention to fund this to the tune of 50 million, I think it is, if I'm not mistaken, where Senator Gopi School. Yeah, 50 million with 100,000 as seed capital for each of these medium and small and medium businesses is excellent, because we need that facilitating environment. My question in terms of changing the paradigm is, I know that under Minister Baptiste Primus there is NETCO and there's IBIS, which is basically also sought to do similar things by providing guidance, training, funding for small business and micro enterprises. What I need to know when the government is making a move in this direction is how successful has NETCO been? When we look at the millions and billions of dollars that NETCO and IBIS have invested in businesses over the years, how many businesses have been affected? How many businesses have been invested in? What is the attrition rate? What is the track record for success? What sectors in terms of small and medium-sized businesses have shown to be more successful, and why? What are the reasons for the attrition rates? And we all know around the world, small and medium businesses have a high failure rate. But we have to do the analysis and use the data when we're investing to find out what the challenges are, so that we can mitigate against those failure rates as we continue and move in this direction. So I'm really hoping that we can look through the books at NETCO, look through the books at IBIS, and find out, well, we've invested $2 billion. We've invested in 300 small and medium-sized businesses. Only 25 or 50 remain viable or sustained. What is the reason for the attrition rate? What sectors in the businesses that have sustained and why? So that when we're putting out the seed capital again, we go with some information to provide a platform for greater success or more sustainability. And I think that's my humble suggestion as we move forward, because I think it's a really good idea. As we seek to engage, and commendably so, small and medium-sized businesses and providing the environment for that in terms of training and monitoring, so that they don't pay their mortgage and they don't buy food, because sometimes a small operator is forced to do that because it's a small operator, and even many of these small operators have also been hit by the tax on online purchases, because they use that as a facility to run their businesses. So we have to put mitigating structures in place to deal with that. While we deal with that, we have to deal with the issue of productivity, Madam President. In Trinidad and Tobago,
Senator Richards, you have 5 more minutes.
I can't believe that. I can't believe that. Productivity. Let me see if I can get it here. I was going to say so much about PTSD. Let me go to the cultural area. congratulations to Senator Hayes, is it? On a brilliant maiden contribution. Very well done. And she spoke about her experience in the cultural sector. And I want to underscore that because I am doing a series of productions with a fashion show. And I spoke to interviewed seven fashion designers, pioneers like Peter Elias, Claudia Pigas, Heather Jones, Ecliffe Eli, who already have product and systems in place and are producing world-class garments. I've also spoken to about 7 upcoming designers who also have similar success stories. And as Senator Hayes has said, we have the music. There's no difference between our music and Jamaican music in terms of quality. It's a subjective cultural preference thing. What the difference in Jamaica and now Africa is the enabling structure the state has put in place. Africa has a thrust called TINA, T-I-N-A. This is New Africa, that they've brought the entire music industry under one umbrella and pushing and making inroads as a state into other territories. What we need to do with fashion is the same thing. What the designers need. They could sew, they could make brilliant designs. They've been selling around the world. They need the state to open doors as a collective. We can't go as Peter Elias, as Heather Jones, as Claudia, because we can't compete with Marc Jacob on that scale of economy. But we can go as brand Trinidad and Tobago with different elements. We can buy a night on Fashion Week in New York and London and showcase our goods and services. Same thing with the music. That's what we need to do. Go as a collective. That's a change in thinking and paradigm I am thinking about that I didn't see articulated. And it is, and in terms of the cultural industries, when you think about it, the entertainment and media and cultural industries are forecast to grow from $1.3 trillion in 2005 to reach $1.3 trillion. PricewaterhouseCoopers 2007 UNESCO. The potential is endless in terms of the cultural areas. But we have duplication of services. We have square pegs and round holes that don't serve the purpose of enabling. And I'm hoping my colleague in the Ministry of Trade will speak to that in terms of the government providing the enabling environment and opening the doors to the markets as a Trinidad Tobago brand collective, because that's the only way we can do it. In terms of innovation also, and I hope I have 2 minutes left. Crime fighting. Daily Express, Monday, 23rd October. National Security Minister of Jamaica, Robert Montag, says the government is developing and applying in the police service 3 new apps. 1, Montage, to document all handwritten, to transfer handwritten documents to digital. 2, an app called Jamaica Eye, which will network almost 500 closed-circuit television cameras, state sector and private sector, to give the police more eyes. We're fighting to put 300 body cameras on police officers. They're enacting apps so the public can participate in crime fighting. That is the kind of change in paradigm we need to engage in Trinidad and Tobago and stop the infighting and all of that. And I had a whole set to talk about communication industry and TTT and the fact that we shouldn't be looking. And I get the issue of total local content. It is commendable. We can't be buying foreign shows that's streaming on Amazon, right? But when you talk about TTT, it's a nostalgic, wonderful sentiment. But any media person worth their salt will tell you we have to be thinking in terms of digital distribution platforms. Television is an old paradigm. So if we're not thinking there, and we're thinking TV, you know, the TTT moniker is great, you know, I grew up on that. But think about 35-year-olds, they don't watch TV on TV. They consume their content differently. So we have to change our thinking to 20 years from now. TTT is nice, you know, but it's TV. The consumption of digital content, archiving cultural artifacts is done digitally. Kids watch it when they want to watch it, not when it's 7 o'clock in the night or 8 o'clock in the night. We have to change our thinking and paradigm. And finally, Madam President, I hope I'm not out of time. Let me make this statement clear. The PNM can't save Trinidad and Tobago alone. The UNC cannot save Trinidad and Tobago alone. If the PNM and the UNC do not work together, we will be here 5 years from now with different faces and the same problem. Madam President, I thank you.
I'm smiling with Senator Mahabir because he was calling for more time and he's saying that other people got and he didn't get. Yes. Not at all. You didn't get any extra time either. Senator Dookie.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for the joy of participating in this debate. Let me begin by making a few comments on some of the statements which were said earlier, because today Senator Mark scared me a bit because he was bowling spin today. He was not bowling his usual pace, but nonetheless he attempted to bowl a few disguised delivery, and I just want to respond to it briefly, because Senator Mark told us that the gap between the rich and the poor is getting wider, and attempted to cast blame on the PNM for this, if this is a fact. I think, Madam President, it is instructive to say that the UNC has to take some responsibility if, in fact, this is so. Because I want to state, Madam President, that when the UNC government suspended the property tax, it benefited the wealthy and the mighty, and not the poor people of Trinidad and Tobago. And when Senator Rambarat reminded us of the manner in which the UNC raided the NGC, putting the monies to unproductive use, in fact, if the gap between the rich and the poor is indeed getting wider, that action would have contributed to it. And many more actions of the UNC, Madam President, would have contributed to this if this is in fact a truth. And the UNC ought not to attempt to place the burden of this or the reason for this on the shoulders of the People's National Movement. And Senator Mark also referred to deficit financing, or the government running deficit budgets. I heard Senator Srikisoon also mention that, and I take no issue with him. Senator Mahabir as well, and I take no issue with him. But I have to take issue with Senator Mark, because the UNC, Madam President, as we know, ran a series of deficit budgets, borrowed a lot of money, but at a time, Madam President, when the country was enjoying high levels of revenues. So I do not think, Madam President, that the UNC has moral authority to tell the PNM about deficit financing. And Senator Mark, again, maybe trying to bowl a googly this time, told us that we are visionless, something that we have heard before, Madam President. But, Madam President, I wish to state with confidence that the People's National Movement has been the only political party in Trinidad and Tobago which has continuously held out a vision for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I remind us, Madam President, of the People's Charter, the Chaguaramas Declaration, the PNM perspective of the 80s and beyond, Vision 2020, and now, of course, Vision 2030. The vision of the People's National Movement, Madam President. And I'm sure when the history of Trinidad and Tobago is written, these vision documents would find a component part of the history of Trinidad and Tobago. So from self-government, Madam President, to industrialization, to the achievement of social and political power, to the evolution and revolution in education, the achievements of these deliverables, Madam President, were founded on the vision of the People's National Movement. But, Madam President, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is now presenting to our people Vision 2030. And the first step of planning, Madam President, is to engage in some sort of analysis of the situation which confronts us, examining the internal environment in which we operate and the external environment. And if you examine the Vision 2020 draft development strategy, you would find some information regarding both the internal and external environment. If we look internally, we know, Madam President, as was said by many speakers here today, we have a challenge with regards to revenue and expenditure. And it was very interesting to note that Senator Mahabe highlighted the difficulty of dealing with expenditure in these times. We would also know, Madam President, that we have some issues which relate to foreign exchange. Some speakers would have identified the issue of productivity and the attitude to work, some of our social and cultural challenges. And of course, as Senator Shriki always talk about, the institutions in our society not being as strong as they ought to be. And on the external side, Madam President, I think we agree that the major challenge which faces us is the decline in oil and gas prices. But when we examine all of the variables at work in both the internal and external environment, Madam President, I think we can agree that there is need to change the paradigm. I think we can agree that there's a need to create new knowledge, as Senator Richards was alluding to while he was wrapping up. Because, you know, there's a saying that if you do the same thing expecting the same result, it is sometimes defined as insanity. But now, Madam President, there is a new saying that if you do the same thing and you expect the same result, a new result, you are being normal. This government is not going to be a normal government. This government will address the challenges which face us with a high level of success. So, Madam President, the decision we have to make, are we going to be just focusing on consumption, or are we going to create an economy that is driven by a philosophy and paradigm of investment? Are we going to be predominantly an economy or a country which is a user of foreign exchange, or are we going to be an economy and a people which act as earners of foreign exchange? Are we going to be problem creators, or are we going to be problem solvers? Are we going to be an economy predominantly driven by the oil and gas sector, or are we going to be a diversified economy? These are the decisions, Madam President, in my mind, which we have to take and make our choices wisely. And that is why, Madam President, when I examine the Vision 2030 draft development strategy, I found a lot of hope and comfort in the aspiration statement, which I would ask your permission to read. The vision is designed to take the country from the present into the future and will inform the country's development planning cycles from 2016 to 2030. It provides direction to government ministries, private sector, civil society, and labor and non-government organizations to ensure alignment with the national development agenda. The vision to 2030 is captured in the following aspiration statement. We are a united, resilient, productive, innovative, and prosperous nation with a disciplined, caring, fun-loving society comprising healthy, happy, and well-educated people, and built on the enduring attributes of self-reliance, respect, tolerance, equity, inclusion, and integrity, in which every citizen is valued and has equal opportunities to achieve his or her full potential. All citizens enjoy a high quality of life, where quality healthcare is available to all, and where safe, peaceful, and environmentally friendly communities are maintained. All citizens are assured of a sound, relevant education system tailored to meet the human resource needs of a modern, progressive, technologically advancing nation. Optimum use is made of all resources of which the nation, with due regard to environmental sustainability and making greater use of renewable resources, while ensuring that we enjoy water, food, and energy security. The family, as the foundation of the society, contributes to its growth, development, and stability. Our economy supports decent work for all and is conducive to entrepreneurship and innovation. There is respect for the rule of law and human rights and the promotion of the principles of democracy, and there is confidence in our public institutions. The diversity and creativity of all its people are valued and nurtured. This is what the government holds out to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam President, why this is important? It is because we must understand the power of vision. And anytime we are faced as a people with challenges, with decisions to make about our direction, it is the vision of our people that we must turn to. Additionally, Madam President, if we examine government's Vision 2030 plan, coming out of our aspiration statement or vision statement, there were 5 thematic areas which the government would have highlighted as our broad fundamental strategic objectives. The first I wish to present today is putting people first and the importance of that. And in doing so, I will highlight a few sectors and few actions of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which is being pursued with success at this time in putting people first. The first, I will just speak briefly to a few things in our social sector. And the first I wish to point out, Madam President, the action of the government by bringing in an additional 9,000 pensioners into the system, because the government of Trinidad and Tobago had increased the statutory limit to $4,500, bringing more pensioners into the system, putting people first. I'd like to add to that, Madam President, the recertification exercise undertaken by the government, and that has to do with the food assistance program, saving the country approximately $13.3 million a month. And if annualized, Madam President, saving the country approximately $160 million a year. And that's right. So, Madam President, recertification exercise, saving the country money so that the government of Trinidad and Tobago can offer more in terms of our social services. And also I note that Senator Richards spoke about duplication. And in terms of our social services, Madam President, there's a high-level committee rationalizing our social programs, which has already led to a reduction in duplication of programs, saving Trinidad and Tobago money, which means, Madam President, more available for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the People's National Movement government, in social services, putting our people first. This philosophy, Madam President, also extends to housing, and I would not get into detail on this matter because I know it will be addressed at a later stage. But what I wish to point out, Madam President, as we engage a new paradigm, is the efforts and actions of the government to restore the HDC back to its original intention, bringing the HDC back to an organization which focuses on ensuring that the lower income groups in our country can have access to low-cost housing, moving away from the philosophy of the previous administration and focusing on the needy, focusing on the people, Madam President, who are least likely to afford housing in the private sector. And the Minister of Finance in his presentation would have highlighted also the Housing Construction Incentive Program, Madam President, which would, in my estimation, bring the private sector into greater opportunity for constructing houses for our people, and would be able, Madam President, to assist the HDC in terms of providing housing accommodation for the many thousands of people on the database. But what I wish to highlight, Madam President, as I see as a major advantage, as the Minister of Finance would have highlighted in his budget presentation, is the Oversight Committee, recognizing the need to ensure that the houses are not just constructed, but they are delivered to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and delivered to them at a faster rate. So I commend the HDC, Madam President, the People's National Movement government, putting people first by improving the HDC philosophy in providing low-cost housing for people. And similarly, Madam President, as the government, recognizing its vision and commitment to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, are also engaged in certain initiatives and actions in the health sector, which confirms the government's commitment to putting people first. The Point Fortin Hospital, for example, Madam President, construction continues, and I wish to state that the construction of the Point Fortin Hospital was never stopped. It is ongoing. And what is important to note, Madam President, without adjusting its capacity under this government, this Point Fortin Hospital would cost the people of Trinidad and Tobago $300 million less. The same, Madam President, for the Arima Hospital. The government of Trinidad and Tobago committed to its completion. Let me remind us, Madam President, that the Point Fortin Hospital, without adjusting its capacity, because of the intervention of the People's National Movement, will save this country $300 million. The same is said for the Arima Hospital, Madam President. Without changing its capacity, Madam President, will cost the taxpayers of this country $200 million less. A savings of $500 million, Madam President. So in addition to saving the country money, these facilities we know would provide job opportunities and improve services to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. In addition to this, Madam President, I can also inform members that there had been an upgrade to the oncology facility at the St. James Radiation Center. And of course, Madam President, the Minister of Finance in his budget presentation committed the government to attempting to find a suitable use for the Children's Hospital in Couva, the building. But, Madam President, I also, sometimes when we look at healthcare, sometimes we focus on the hard infrastructure, and sometimes the systems and processes by which goods and services are delivered in the system are ignored. But I'm happy to say, Madam President, that through the leadership of the Minister of Finance, by re-engineering the manner in which drugs are procured, would have saved this country a lot of money. And I could point out to a few, having used the PAHO Strategic Fund, the government of Trinidad and Tobago in 1 year, in terms of the procurement of HIV drugs, would have saved the country in excess of $60 million. And in terms of other drugs, Madam President, because of re-engineering the way these goods are procured, overall would have saved the country between 16 and 85% of the money usually used to procure these drugs. So the government, Madam President, is committed to ensuring that healthcare services are provided to the people of Trinidad and Tobago in an efficient and effective manner. But not just in terms of drugs, as I would have mentioned the drug procurement process, but also in non-pharmaceutical products, Madam President. The government, again, by re-engineering the way the procurement exercise is pursued, and I can refer here to the orthopedic supplies, pins, bowls, plates, Madam President, again would have saved the country millions of dollars by ensuring that the drugs are, in this case, the orthopedic supplies are procured in a new manner. What I am holding out to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President, as it relates to the provision of healthcare services, is that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is committed to changing the paradigm and finding a more and better way of providing services to the people of Trinidad and Tobago regarding the healthcare. But, Madam President, Senator Mahabir would have spoken a bit about certain lifestyle diseases, diabetes, hypertension, and also obesity. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President, I wish to inform members, have created an NCD plan, non-communicable disease plan, with the assistance of the IDB. And why is that important, Madam President? As the Minister of Health attempts to put out to the people of Trinidad and Tobago a new way of engaging healthcare and focusing on preventative measures, Madam President, focusing on trying to avoid these diseases which Senator Mahabir spoke to, by ensuring that there is a plan and there is a program that we believe, when implemented successfully, would reduce the number of lifestyle diseases in the future. What that would lead to, Madam President, is a healthier nation, and a healthier nation would lead to a more productive nation. So I congratulate the Minister of Health for all the initiatives he has led with great success in the Ministry of Health. The second thematic area, Madam President, I wish to focus on is promoting good governance and service excellence. And I wish to state in this context, Madam President, how important institutions are to lend to the effectiveness of the structure of government and governance. And I believe the government of Trinidad and Tobago is engaging in a new public management philosophy, a new public management paradigm, as we begin to strengthen our institutions and indeed create new institutions that would lead to a higher level of confidence among our people. And the Minister of Finance, and indeed the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, would have spoken to the issue of the Revenue Authority. Indeed, my colleague, Senator Nigel De Freitas, would have also mentioned the benefits of this particular intervention. And I wish to add support for it, Madam President, by stating how important it is to engage in a new way in which we go about the tax collection process in Trinidad and Tobago. Senator West would have told us about the billions of dollars in the tax gap. And what I believe would be a major outcome of the introduction of this semi-autonomous institution, the Revenue Authority, would be the reduction of this gap, because It is my view, Madam President, that the Revenue Authority promoting participation, which I believe would lead to a reduction in tax avoidance, which I believe, Madam President, additionally would bring the informal economy into the formal economy and lead to a higher level of tax collection, thereby reducing the difference between what we collect as taxes and what we should collect. I believe, Madam President, that this intervention, institutional strengthening, would be fair, equitable, and it would be an independent type organization, Madam President, which, as I said, would improve the confidence that our people would have on the tax collection system. So, Madam President, in my view, there's absolutely nothing to fear about this intervention. It will strengthen our institutions and help to promote good governance and service excellence in Trinidad and Tobago. But, Madam President, as I mentioned, the Revenue Authority and the whole issue of tax collection, I want to express support for the reintroduction of the property tax. And just to remind our citizens, Madam President, that the principle of property tax is a benefit principle. And that property tax, Madam President, accounts for a very high percentage of local government revenue. And I believe, Madam President, that the reintroduction of this measure by this government, the benefits will far outweigh the cost, Madam President, so that it will add to monies available for the government to use in development activities and increase, Madam President, the revenues available to Trinidad and Tobago. So, Madam President, as we pursue Team 2, promoting good governance and service excellence, I endorse the position of the government in terms of ensuring that the Revenue Authority is up and running and available to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But also, Madam President, as we promote good governance and service excellence by strengthening our institutions, I said the Revenue Authority on the revenue side, but also on the expenditure side, as we know, the government, Madam President, is going to ensure that the independent Office of Procurement Regulator and the entire process, Madam President, is re-engineered. But what this will do, Madam President, is improve the level of accountability regarding how the government pursues expenditure. And what I want to endorse in government's approach in ensuring that the Office of the Procurement Regulator is operationalized in Trinidad and Tobago is the review component of the process, which I believe, Madam President, will improve the level of accountability and also, Madam President, ensure that decisions are made with regards to the way goods and services are procured that will ensure that there will be a greater chance of the government achieving value for money. In Europe, for example, Madam President, procurement systems have shown to lead to approximately 10% savings on expenditure. And I believe, Madam President, if we can pursue this with success, as I believe we will, I see no reason why we cannot have similar benefits in Trinidad and Tobago. I believe, Madam President, that this institutional advancement in a structure of government and governance in Trinidad and Tobago will lead to the reduction of corruption, will lead to the reduction of efficiency, and as I said, Madam President, ensure that we can achieve value for money, something that our people have been crying out for. So, Madam President, in terms of ensuring that we can provide a type of governance and service excellence from an institutional perspective, Madam President. On the revenue side, the institution of the Revenue Authority. On the expenditure side, the Office of the Procurement Regulator. Strengthening our institutions in Trinidad and Tobago and improving the governance for our people. The third thematic area, Madam President, I wish to address for a few minutes. As the government relentlessly pursues its vision and pursues its plan for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, has to deal with improved productivity through quality infrastructure and transportation. I believe, Madam President, that as a country we need to take an examination of the types of transactional costs that our people, our citizens have to engage in. And one way we can deal with that is to build strong infrastructure and transportation networks that I believe, Madam President, if we are successful, what it will do is build connectivities among communities, build connectivities between customers and suppliers, and build connectivities between the state sector service and those who use the services provided by the state. Accordingly, Madam President, I want to congratulate the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Minister of Works and Transport in particular for ensuring that actions are taken with success to pursue and complete the Point 14 highway. As we know, Madam President, there is also significant activity towards ensuring that the Komoto to Manzanilla highway is completed. We also know, Madam President, that the upgrade to the Maruga Road and the port construction there is being pursued. And also, Madam President, the Toko First Class Road is in the design stage. What will happen, Madam President, as the government builds strong infrastructure? What will happen, Madam President? It would improve the business development opportunities available to the business sector and improve employment opportunities for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But, Madam President, I want to point out in this regard, as we improve productivity through quality infrastructure and transportation, and I would have mentioned the network of highways and ports and other infrastructure, is the impact I believe it is going to have on the tourism sector. And indeed, Senator De Freitas would have expressed a lot of optimism regarding tourism and Tobago. Because I believe, Madam President, that as a nation, and of course I think Senator De Freitas made this very clear in his contribution, as a people, we have a distinctive capability in tourism. As I always say, I think we have three cultures in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a Tobago culture, we have a Trinidad culture, and we have a Trinidad and Tobago culture. A unique experience, Madam President, that I believe is awaiting us as the government builds a new paradigm and a new architecture regarding tourism. So, Madam President, improving productivity through quality infrastructure and transportation is being pursued with great success by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And also, Madam President, I want to add in terms of building and strengthening our infrastructure, system, and network. And I know, of course, the Minister of Public Utilities, when he speaks, he would address the public utility infrastructure. But I want to congratulate the government of Trinidad and Tobago, first of all, for pursuing a new paradigm regarding subsidies. We have seen it with the fuel subsidy, and we have heard that the government of Trinidad and Tobago making the statement through various ministers at different intervals about the subsidies that are given to the utilities being unsustainable and in my mind represents a commitment by the government of Trinidad and Tobago to strengthen the public utilities infrastructure in our country, to make the organizations which function under this ministry less reliant on the Treasury. I commend the government for bringing a new philosophy, a new paradigm regarding subsidies. And I'm sure, as I said, the minister would elaborate more on that. Madam President, let me quickly, as I have 5 minutes, and if I didn't believe time ran out fast when Senator Richards was speaking, I now find myself in that position, and I assure you, Madam President, I would not beg for more time. Team 4, Madam President. Team 4. You forced me to ask the injury time with that intervention. Building globally competitive business, Madam President, is the fourth thematic area. You know, as Michael Porter said, that nations don't compete, firms do, and the government of Trinidad and Tobago is committed towards creating an enabling environment for business to succeed in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm sure the Minister of Trade and Industry would address the issue of diversification, so I would not speak to that. But just to highlight something presented in the Minister of Finance presentation, the access to foreign exchange for exporters and the intervention of getting the central bank to license the Exim Bank as a dealer in foreign exchange, I think, Madam President, will bring good value to exporters. Senator, I go quickly. Richards would have spoken about the Business Development Incentive Program. I wouldn't say much about this because Senator Richards would have highlighted the benefits of this, but in fact, Madam President, we have to commend the government for creating opportunities for small businesses, startup businesses to be successful. And I also want to highlight, as the government builds globally competitive business, Madam President, the business process outsourcing expansion through the TTIFC, Madam President, which would also allow for greater use of local labor. So Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President, through the vision and programs of the government, helping our businesses to become more successful, ensuring that the objective identified in Team 4, building globally competitive business, can be pursued with success. And finally, Madam President, Team 5, connecting to the vision articulated in Vision 2030 and connecting to the overall plan for development in Trinidad and Tobago, valuing and enhancing our environment. The government, Madam President, of Trinidad and Tobago has created a number of policy, including the National Forestry Policy, the Green Environment Government Policy, the National Wildlife Policy, the National Protected Areas Policy, and the National Climate Change Policy. So from a policy perspective, Madam President, the government engaging in actions that would lead to improving the way we treat our environment. And not just policy, Madam President, through the Ministry of Planning and Development, an implementation plan has been developed, and that includes, Madam President, a national determined contribution being submitted to the United Nations, and this deals, Madam President, with a plan which provides direction, guidance in the mitigation and adaptation strategies to increase resilience to climate change, Madam President. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam President, engaging in policy and action plans to ensure that there is improvement in the way we treat and nurture and value the environment, Madam President. So putting people first, Madam President, the way we deal with our social safety net, social programs, housing, infrastructure, delivering good governance, Madam President, Team 2 of government's plan, improving citizens' participation in the activities of the state and government, improving our public management architecture through institutional enhancement and strengthening, improving productivity through productivity through quality infrastructure and transport, the third thematic area, Madam President, being pursued with a lot of success. Building competitive business and valuing our environment and enhancing our environment. 5 thematic areas, Madam President, connected to the vision the government has held out for the people of Trinidad and Tobago as contained in Vision 2030.
Dookie, your time is
Thank you.
up. Mr. Henry.
Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to close off this day of full debate. We've been here since 10 o'clock this morning, and we've had quite a full array of issues. And discussed. And I want to begin, first of all, by addressing a couple of the issues before I get into my substantive presentation of this 2017-2018 budget. And I want to start off first because the day started with the usual contribution from Senator Mark and the first opposition speaker. But I have a blank sheet of paper here. I took no notes because he didn't say anything of substance. So it was his normal alarmist rhetoric and so on. So we don't need to waste much time. There. I want to move next to Independent Senator Sri Kisun. There's a couple of things he said that triggered responses from several others on our side, in which he talked about he ranted and raved about, about austerity budget and so on. And yes, you did.
Yes, but Senator Henry, first of all, there seems to be a restlessness in the chamber. For those who are restless, you know that you can walk it off a little bit if you really need to. Senator Henry ranting and raving, I think you need to just, present that in another manner, okay?
I'm so advised, Madam President, and I withdraw that. But of course, yes, he repeatedly referred to.
Please. All right, I'm not going to say it again. The first time I said it, it was with some humor. But at this stage, let's just let Senator Henry make his contribution, please. Senator Henry, continue.
Yes, thank you for the protection, Madam President. I don't know what they're so jumpy about. And I've heard this reflected by several speakers in the public domain about, the government engaging in all kind of austerity measures and so on. And I find that to be a little bit disingenuous, because if you look at the budget as presented by our finance minister and today by our minister in the Ministry of Finance, there is really nothing of substance that could support that view. Our budget that was presented here did not include any significant austerity measures other than the increase in diesel prices, right? There was no mass layoffs announced in the budget, no cuts in public employment and so on, no cuts in subsidies of food and basic items for people, right? No increases in food, no measures that should lead to increases in food prices other than, again, the diesel issue. No devaluation of the currency, no major cuts in social services. I was a student of the 1980s, and I know what austerity programs look like. And certainly, what we presented and what our minister presented was nowhere near could be classified as such. And I think that the people who are repeating this kind of rhetoric should think again. In fact, several speakers talked about, well, we're going to end up in the hands of the IMF, well, of course, including Senator Mark. But the whole point about the budget and this was said explicitly by the minister as well as the Prime Minister himself, is that we were doing this to precisely avoid going to the IMF. So you set out not to go to the IMF, and you get accused of wanting to go to the IMF or somehow going to end up in the hands of the IMF, which is not, you know. And our measures were pretty measured and well thought through, okay? And well thought out in many ways. So the social programs, they are all pretty much intact. Employment is pretty much intact. No major impositions in the budget that should result in escalating food prices or layoffs. So the IMF austerity measures from the 1980s, many of us are old enough to remember what it really entails. And it resulted in riots in countries when they cut food subsidies and so on, and laid off significant portions of this public sector workers. So we know that. So we are not, there's nothing here that is even close to that in what was presented. So all this talk about this set of austerity and what it might entail is a bit premature and inaccurate, right? Very, very, as my colleague here is saying, very, very alarmist. And, well, and another issue that was raised, and I'll expand on it, my colleague touched on it, who just spoke, Senator Dookie, about the budget deficits. And I really didn't plan to talk about this again because I was here on that side when the UNC came with all their budgets. And I've raised this issue at several occasions. Right? So let me put it to rest. Right? The first budget that was presented by the UNC, because we're talking, this is a budget presentation that we're doing right here tonight, was projected expenditure was $49.02 billion. That's the 2010-2011 budget. Revenue, 41.3. The budget deficit, $7.7 billion. That's what the UNC came with in 2010. Right. So listen carefully. 2011-2012 budget, a year later, this was still Minister Dukaran. The expenditure in the budget presentation, I'm not talking about the actual figures, what was brought to this House as a budget. 54.6 billion, revenue 47.0. Budget deficit 7.6. That's the projected deficit in the budget presentation of 2011-2012. Okay? Now, 2012-2013, they expected revenue to increase again to 50.7 billion. That's the revenue side. You know what they plan to spend? 58.4. That's the revenue figure for the budget of 2012-2013. With a projected deficit, once again, of 7.7 billion. The budgeted oil price for the first 3 years was $75, $75, $75. Those 3 years I quoted. Right? And it was, the actual price turned out to be much higher than that. Okay? 2013, 2014. There was, oil prices were rising over that period. So when they came with the budget for 2013, 2014, they expected revenue to go up from the previous year of 50.7 billion to 55 in revenue because oil prices were pretty good. You know what they came with as expenditure? 61.2 billion. Okay? 61.2 for a projected deficit of 6.4 billion. All right? That's the record. That's what you came as budget. That's what you brought to this parliament. 2014, 2015, well, everyone said yeah, we expect a big budget because election coming up, and we know you will do anything to try to win the election. Oil price again budgeted $80. Revenue was projected to increase to $60.4 billion because oil price is nice, energy prices going good. You know what you came with as expenditure? $64.7 billion. Budget deficit projected $4.4 billion. So the combined in those years would have put you at about, if you had really spent what you had planned to spend, the combined budget deficits for your 5 years would have been $31 billion. That's right. Okay? That's the record. You could go back and check it on the Ministry of Finance website. That's what you came to the Parliament with. Right? So in other words, it wasn't an accidental or difficult scenario that caused you to run budget deficits. You deliberately decided to spend more than we were earning. It was a plan, because I was sitting on that side when Minister Hawaii said, we will balance the budget in 2016. Yes, when you were out of office. No, but you, well, by that time, you knew you weren't coming back.
Still not coming.
So, you balance, yes, that is when they planned. They said yes. So we asked, well, why are you running all these deficits when oil prices are good? They said, oh, yeah, we'll balance it back in 2016, 1 year after the election. Right? So don't try to pretend that this was something that happened accidental. This was a deliberate policy of the UNC to run these deficits and to increase spending every year, regardless of the increase in revenue. All right? So, and all of this does not include a lot of money that would have been taken out from state enterprises like the NGC and so on. I remember my colleague, the Honorable Attorney General, used to say, you know, the UNC spent $400 billion in their 5 years. And we used to laugh because we used to take it as somewhat as a joke, because we know the UNC spending based on these figures. It would have been a lot less than that. But you know, after we looked at all the figures that they took from everywhere and the borrowing that wasn't included in the budget, it turned out to be almost true, somewhere up there. Right? So, in fact, I used to tell the Attorney General, I say, well, we used to laugh at your $400 figure, but it ended up, no, because we were saying it partly in jest. We too. But you ended up almost fulfilling exactly what the Attorney General was saying, because you raided everything and you spent everything. You borrowed on top of all of this, off the record, that we ended up having to be stuck with when we came into office in 2015. All right? So, just to put it in perspective, again, because I've raised these issues before, the previous PNM government ran about 6 years of budget surpluses between 2002 and 2008. Surpluses, not deficits. And the Honorable Prime Minister at the time made sure that the Heritage and Stabilization Fund was built up to where it was when you came into office. Most of that money that you met in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund came from the budget surpluses of the PNM administration, especially between 2002 and 2008. In fact, the 2008-2009 period of the government under the Honorable Patrick Manning realized a budget surplus of $12 billion. That's the year when oil price went up to $144 a barrel, right? And in that year, that was the single largest contribution to the Heritage and Stabilization Fund in that year, a surplus of 12 billion. And the prior years before that all had budget surpluses. So this notion that, you know, some commentators might say, oh yes, the PNM UNC same. No, 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 we are not. No, no. You're much more responsible. Yes. And so fiscally, during the period 2000 to 2008 budget, because of the budget surpluses, there was additions to national savings. So when the 2008-2009 crisis hit, we could have survived properly. Right? There were significant sums deposited in various accounts at the central bank. So when the crisis hit, the PNM government at the time in 2009 into early 2010, before the election, of course, drew down on those deposits to keep the economy going. They did not have to resort to much borrowing. They ran down some of the accounts that had been built up in the previous years. And this is what responsible fiscal policy is all about. Right? In fact, the country did not feel much of the effects of the 2008-2009 crisis because of the savings that were accumulated before. Right? And I've said these things previously, and in fact, when I was in the other side, I used to remind them constantly that this is what is happening. Right? In fact, the first minister under the UNC, Minister of Finance, Minister Dookie, used to talk about the cash balances at the central bank being run down by the PNM and how terrible that was. Well, he used to mispronounce the word balances, I remember. Yeah, he said, well, yeah, okay, I haven't tried to say it, but, but seriously, he used to mispronounce it. But the point is that, yes, he was correct in that we ran down the balances, but that's what it was there for. That was the savings that was accumulated in the 6 years before. So, so there's no comparison to what we did with rising oil prices and what you did. So don't try that. Also, so now let me change gears a little bit, Madam President, because I want to talk about the global environment a bit, because it is very critical for our country. As we know, the international environment is very uncertain at the moment, and it could get very messy in a short time from now, because there are several things working against positive economic growth on a larger scale and stability. And as you know, we must pay attention to the international events, because in the scheme of things, we are price takers. We have no influence over the price of oil or gas or natural gas, our two main energy earners, our two main money earners. So we have to pay attention to what is happening in the world economy. And there's a lot of issues that could really make things worse for us without anything we could do about it. We could end up in a very terrible situation, or we could be very buoyant based on international events. And when we look around today, I mean, the IMF and in its global economic outlook and so on is projecting positive growth for the economy for 2018 and the world economy. Of course, that is largely based on recovery and positive growth still in China. Even though it's slowing down, it's still growing high. Its growth rate is still higher than most of Western Europe and America. But there are several factors that could work against us, Madam President. We are living at a time when, almost 10 years after the financial crisis of 2008-2009, some people will say 2007. There's some disagreement in terms of when you could actually say the crisis started back then. part of the problem is that the powers that be in the advanced industrial countries, including Europe and the United States, really never dealt with the real causes and issues with that financial crisis. They have basically kicked the can down the road. And they have, since then, they have created another bubble, stock market bubble, that this is what you see going on in New York and so on. It's a bubble. Largely because of what they have done to try to get themselves out of recession. They engage in something called QE, and quantitative easing, which is just a euphemism for printing money. And they've tried to print money in such large quantities to stimulate economic growth, right? And rather than the money going into productive investment and increasing the real economic base of the US and advanced countries, what the money has gone into is bidding up stock prices. So the Dow Jones is hitting record after record for the past several years. So what the money has gone into is really non-productive investment. So they have ceded real investment to East Asia, mainly China, and they are engaging in basically financial speculation. And that is what is happening. And as the old saying goes, what goes up must come down. And that bubble might burst sometime soon. We don't know when, it's hard to predict, but if that bubble happens to burst within the next year or so, we could be in deep trouble again, in a lot more difficult circumstances due to no fault of our own. Okay? Yeah, because our situation is one where we depend on aggregate demand in the international economy to help to keep oil prices and gas prices up. And hence, we piggyback on that. You know, that's the reality of our existence. Until further notice, that's what we do. So we have to face that reality that we could be in for a rough ride if some of the forces work against us. Now, there are several other important factors. There's fractionalization in potential fractionalization in Europe, with several regions now wanting to declare independence. So the whole European project could come under question in the months and years ahead. But then there's an important development elsewhere in the that could impact on us in terms of our economy, and it's something we should note because the developments in China, I mean, the Communist Party just had their conference and so on, and what they are doing, the President Xi consolidated his power, and he basically issued a quite strong statement about the Chinese ambitions over the next 30 years to become a dominant world power. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because we may have to reorient our thinking in that direction of the world. Instead of, because we are in the American sphere of influence, we tend to think that we should, design all of our policies and our programs that at a level in which it fits in with the American system, particularly with our dependence on the US dollar. And one of the events that is shaping the world in the next few years is the declining significance of the US dollar on the international market. And I'll come back to that because that has implications for our exchange rate situation and the foreign exchange problem that we have had since 2014. Right? So the significance of the US dollar will most likely be declining in the years ahead. And we have to plan for this. Right? The Chinese are now asserting themselves, and this might be not necessarily a bad thing for us, because there's a move to make the Chinese currency international, and this could decrease reliance on US dollars. And this kind of unwarranted demand for US dollars, that I would say, use the word unwarranted, that we experience all the time, could dissipate. Because really and truly, if you think of the demand for the US dollar, why do people demand the US dollar? The same thing that is causing us headache here all the time. Why do people demand US dollars? As opposed to any other currency? Think about the problem, right? Because, of course, we know the answers to some extent, that it's the number one, is the key currency in the system, is the number one traded currency. People accept it for international payments. But really and truly, the first fundamental reason why you should demand a foreign currency is because you want to buy something from the country. That's the essence of how a country becomes international, how a currency becomes international, sorry. Is that you want to buy something from that country. But what do we really buy from the US? Or, put it another way, what do we really need to buy from the US? Not much. In my estimation, not very much. Most of the basic commodities and household items that we use come from China, or somewhere near to China. Right? Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, even the Kia motor cars and so on. So there must be a rethinking of this scenario where there's such a love affair with the US dollar. In fact, I have argued in my classes and elsewhere that the US dollar should perhaps be one of the most worthless currencies in the world, because they have printed so much of it over the past 40 years to keep their economy going, that it really shouldn't be in such high demand. It's not backed by gold since 1971, when Nixon came off the gold standard. And so what are we doing? And some of you may say, I'm straying a bit and talking about all this international stuff. Yeah. I didn't give way.
Senator Henry, please continue. Yeah. And please allow Senator Henry to continue with his contribution.
Yeah. No, relax and learn something. Yeah. We did too. Relax and learn something, yeah.
It's above the head.
Yeah, we know that. You know, I like it when you all come back 2 years later and tell me, and just meet me in the corridor and say you were right. That you wouldn't say it in here. Right? So it has implications for what we are facing in terms of our foreign exchange problem, which was another gift from the UNC, by the way, when they went and interfered with the system that was in place since 1993 and destabilized the currency. Now, if you look at our foreign exchange crisis, right, what is different now from, let's say, 1998 or 2007? One of the things that is present is currency hoarding and speculation, which we had avoided from 1993 till recent times. There was not much hoarding or speculation against the Trinidad and Tobago dollar. And last year I mentioned it, but it needs to be emphasized again, that when I hear some of my colleagues calling for devaluation and allowing the currency to float and all kind of craziness, I mean, I think it's very irresponsible on their part. Now, in times past, negatively speculating against a country's currency was a criminal offense. And many of my colleagues know that. But yet you hear people openly calling for devaluation of the currency, devaluation of the currency. And they also know that once you call for devaluation of your currency, loud enough and long enough, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because everyone expects that it will happen. So everywhere I go, and you sit down anywhere, they say, so when is the minister going to devalue? We hear it's next week. We hear it's Tuesday. We hear it's Wednesday. And these big business people come up to me and ask me that. Say, you might know, you there. You know? And I say, what is this? What is all this about? Why do you want a devaluation so bad? And when I talk devaluation, I'm not talking about a simple change like a few cents. They want big devaluation. You know, to 8.50, 9, 10 to 1. Right? And I say, what is your point? What do you stand to gain? Why are you insisting that the minister must devalue the currency? Right? I said, listen, I told one businessman in particular, I said, okay, so you get that next week. You will make a few million TT dollars because you have some US outside, you'll reconvert and probably buy up some nice cars or some real estate quickly. So you get a benefit. And then what? What happens to the country? What happens to the rest of us who have to live here? You probably have your house in Miami, right? Or several houses. So what happens to the rest of us? And what happens to your own business 2 and 3 years down the road? So you make some money on the conversion rate, right? Because you could get 8 or 10 TT dollars for your US, which you probably bought at 6. So you make a nice raise without much risk, right? So what are you going to do?
Have a seat. Will the senator with the offending device please leave the chamber? Continue, Senator Henry.
Okay. So I'm making the point here that our foreign exchange situation is somewhat manageable if people will consider not just and diminish the amount of speculation and so on. Now, if you look at the review of the economy, the same review of the economy everybody has, and you look at non-energy imports from 2012, this is from the balance of payments table. 2012, roughly 6 billion. Non-energy imports. 2013, about 5.5 billion. 2014, about 5.7 billion. 2015, roughly about 6 billion worth of non-energy. So there's no drastic change in demand for imports that could justify the high demand for US dollars. It has remained roughly the same over the past 5-6 years. So what is driving this? What is driving this? Now, we have certain factors that are different today than what was happening in the early 90s when the currency actually was floated. I know the minister mentioned somewhere that we have people perhaps in the casino business who are making a lot of money in TT dollars and want to send it out to other places, and they are putting pressure on the exchange rate as well. You have a large Venezuelan contingent now present in Trinidad and Tobago who are working, earning TT dollars, and would like to help out their family in Venezuela, so they are looking to export money back to Venezuela, right? Yes, we have and a proliferation of Chinese groceries, which kind of doubles as casinos at times, And now when you walk into regular places, now you have gambling devices all over the country. Just what would be a normal buy in Trinidad and Tobago now doubles as a casino. And it's not even disguised as a members club. It's just open gambling. So these factors are putting a little bit of pressure on the exchange rate, making it a little bit more difficult for us to contain the situation. But, Madam President, we still, despite all of that, have a very decent. I would say it's not the best, but we have a different macroeconomic environment. And thankfully, the PNM is in office. Thankfully. Thankfully. Because if it would, that crowd at the other side, given what I read out in terms of what they brought to the House as budget.
Senator Henry, you have 5 more minutes.
Yes. So if it would, that irresponsible crowd there, right? Who knows what we would have been in? Right? It's very, very sad. Because they spent most of their time in office trying to be popular. Right? And they didn't make any hard decisions at all about improving revenue or increasing any taxes and so on. So they basically hide for 5 years and 90 days. Right? What tough measure did you take? You can't name any. None. 0. Right? You never had the wherewithal to exercise that kind of discipline and take the heat. Right? You never took any heat. You just pretended that everything was just happy-go-merry. And the figures I read out showed it. You just kept increasing expenditure like there's no tomorrow. Right? What tough decision? Even as something as basic as the property tax, which the majority of the country agrees with, you refuse to implement that.
Agreed.
Something as straightforward, and that's a no-brainer. And you wouldn't even go there because you campaigned for 5 years and 90 days and you still lost. Yeah, that kept you quiet, right? That shut him up. That shut him up. Yeah. So, yes. So you campaign.
The Elections and Boundaries Commission saved you.
You campaigned for 5 years and 90 days and still come up second. In fact, you come last. Because there was only 2 of us in it. But you still come last. So stay quiet. Oh, sorry. So yes, so don't come us and try to, now that you're in opposition, don't come up with any bright ideas. And we don't need any advice from you, as our Honorable Prime Minister often says. We don't need any advice from you. Our Minister of Finance is quite capable. And we don't need any fiscal advice from any one of you over on that side because you have nothing to teach us, nothing to advise us based on your horrific track record. I refer to your period of rule. I refer to your period of governing this country as the disaster. The Palestinians is call it Al Nakba. Yes, you were Al Nakba for Trinidad and Tobago. You're a disaster. So, is my time up, Ms. Madam? I'll hit them a few more shots, yeah? Yeah. Yeah. So you set back this country's development by 10 years. So we had to go to Vision 2030 because of you.
That's right.
You did so much damage. Yeah.
Reckless.
Yeah. You couldn't generate economic growth with all of that billions of dollars. So where was the money going?
Reclining chairs.
Right?
That it was good.
So yeah. So don't. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't brandish. So, Madam President, with these few words, I thank you.
Yes.
Very good ending.
Madam President, this is a nice one. I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to Wednesday, 25th October 2017. That's tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Honorable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Wednesday, October the 25th, 2017 at 10 a.m. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. The ayes